On a frozen mountain road in Idaho, where snow erases every trace and silence presses heavy, three German shepherd puppies lie bound to a roadside fence. Bodies stiffening in the cold, watching cars pass, waiting for one soul to stop. See them and choose mercy before winter claims them. If this moment touches your heart, pause for a second and leave amen in the comments. A quiet prayer for lives that almost went unseen. Winter had settled deep over Sawtooth Valley, Idaho. The kind of winter that stripped the land to its bones and left nothing soft behind. Only snow packed hard by wind and cold that pressed down without mercy. The road cut through the mountains like a pale scar, narrow, quiet, and slick with ice, bordered by a weathered wooden fence that had stood there longer than most memories. The temperature had fallen below 12 degrees Celsius, low enough that breath came out thin and sharp, low enough that mistakes did not forgive. Along that fence, spaced several yards apart as if placed deliberately, three German shepherd puppies were tied with short lengths of rope. They were small, 6 to 8 weeks old at most, their bodies still round with puppy softness, ears not yet sure whether to stand or fold. Snow had crusted into their fur and hardened there. Ice clung to their whiskers and paws. Their movements had slowed to small, weak shifts, the kind that cost more energy than they returned. They did not cry anymore. Crying had passed. They only watched. Cars came through the valley now and then, tires hissing on frozen pavement, headlights sliding past without pause. Each vehicle carried warmth, motion, choice. Each one passed. The puppies tracked the sound until it faded, then waited again, pressed into a silence that felt endless. They did not know why they were there. They only knew cold and restraint and the fading pull of their own strength. Several miles away, down a secondary road that dipped toward a cluster of buildings half buried in snow, Margaret Lewis stood inside her small bakery and counted the day's receipts with stiff fingers. Margaret was 70 years old, a widow for nearly a decade, and she moved carefully, not because she was weak, but because she had learned that winter punished haste. Her bakery, Lewis Bread and Hearth, had once been a morning anchor for the town. In recent years, winters like this one had thinned the foot traffic until some days she saw no one at all. The ovens were still warm, the smell of bread still familiar, but the room felt too large for one person. Margaret wrapped loaves that might not sell and wondered, not for the first time, whether this would be the season she finally locked the door for good. She missed her husband most in winter. He had believed stubbornly that people would always come back for simple things: bread, warmth, company. Margaret was no longer sure. She turned the sign on the door from open to closing soon, and stood for a moment longer, listening to the hum of the cooling ovens, weighing the cost of staying hopeful. Back on the mountain road, the light shifted as clouds thickened, turning the snow a flat, blinding white. The puppy's breathing had grown shallow. One sagged against the rope, legs folded under him. Another tried to lift his head and could not hold it there. The third still watched the road with a thin, stubborn focus, as if will alone could keep him present. The fence creaked once in the wind. Then, far up the road, a sound changed. Tires slowed. Gravel crunched under snow. A dark pickup truck edged onto the shoulder and stopped. The engine idled low and uncertain, as if the driver had not yet decided whether stopping was a mistake. Daniel Brooks sat behind the wheel and let his hands rest there for a second longer than necessary. Daniel was 41, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness that came from years of discipline rather than ease. His face was clean-shaven, weathered, eyes gray and alert, a man who noticed details without advertising it. He had spent most of his adult life as a Navy SEAL, and though he no longer wore the uniform, the habits remained. He did not rush decisions. He listened to the quiet. He had been driving back to his cabin after picking up supplies, planning to beat the next storm. What stopped him was not a sound, but an absence, a wrongness in the shape of the roadside that tugged at him the way danger once had. He cut the engine and opened the door. Cold hit him hard, immediate, biting through layers. He stepped out and closed the door carefully, then stood still, scanning the fence line. It took a moment for his eyes to separate shapes from snow. Then he saw them. 3 small bodies, 3 ropes. No movement that meant safety. Daniel felt a tightness settle in his chest. Not panic, but focus. He walked toward the fence, boots crunching, breath controlled. Up close, the damage became clear. Ice had formed along the ropes. The knots were neat, deliberate. These puppies had not wandered here. They had been placed. Daniel knelt beside the first one, a male, black and tan, fur stiff with frost. He touched the puppy's side with bare fingers and felt cold through to the bone. The puppy's eyes flickered, barely alive but slipping. Daniel did not speak. Words wasted heat. He moved. He pulled off his gloves, worked the rope free, and lifted the small body against his chest, tucking it inside his jacket. He could feel the puppy shudder. A weak response, but a response. He moved to the second, then the third, working fast now, but precise. Each rope came loose without resistance. Too easy. The kind of easy that meant someone had wanted them to stay, but not struggle. Daniel carried all three back to the truck in 2 trips, setting them gently on the passenger seat and floor, wrapping them in spare coats, turning the heater to its highest setting. He watched their chests rise and fall, counted breaths, adjusted layers. His jaw tightened, not with anger yet, but with resolve. As the truck warmed, he looked back at the fence, at the empty spaces where the puppies had been tied. He took it in, the road, the lack of tracks, the choice someone had made to leave living things here and trust the cold to finish the work. Daniel closed the door and sat behind the wheel again. His hands were steady, but his thoughts were not quiet. He knew this moment mattered. He did not yet know how, only that it did. He eased the truck back onto the road, the tires finding grip, the engine pulling them forward through the white. The storm was building. Somewhere down the valley, Margaret Lewis turned off her bakery lights one by one, unaware that a line had just been crossed on a mountain road, unaware that 3 small lives were moving toward warmth, and that the stillness of winter had already begun to break. Cold wind moved low across the valley, steady and sharp, carrying fine snow that scraped against metal and glass. The road climbed gently toward the ridge, empty now, as if the world had stepped aside. Daniel Brooks drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed forward, but his attention stayed on the passenger seat beside him. 3 small shapes lay wrapped in coats and blankets. The heater roared. It still felt too slow. Daniel adjusted the vents again, then again, knowing it would not change physics. Heat takes time. Life sometimes does not have it. He glanced at the puppies and felt the weight settle deeper. He had seen still bodies before. He had learned how fast minutes could turn final. That knowledge did not fade with discharge papers. It stayed. He drove faster than he liked, but not fast enough to lose control. The road punished mistakes. His cabin sat above the valley on a narrow spur, built by his own hands years earlier, when quiet felt like medicine. He reached it without seeing another car. He parked close to the door and cut the engine. Silence rushed in. He carried the puppies inside in 2 careful trips, moving with purpose, not panic. Inside, the cabin held cold that had seeped into the walls overnight. Daniel lit the stove first. Fire answered. He laid the puppies on a folded blanket near the heat, not too close. Careful of shock, he knelt and began the work that mattered. He checked gums, pale but not gray. He listened for breath, counted slow rises, pressed fingers lightly to small ribs. 2 responded with faint movement. The third barely did. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had learned not to bargain with outcomes. You act, you adjust. You act again. He rubbed paws gently, not to warm fast, but to keep blood moving. He spoke low, not to calm himself, but because calm helped hands stay precise. He thought of a lesson drilled into him long ago, one he had never written down. Do not look for permission when a life is in front of you. He had followed orders for years. He had also learned when orders arrived too late. He set water to warm and mixed a small amount with sugar, measured, practical. He touched a drop to the mouth of the weakest puppy. Nothing. He waited, tried again. A tiny tongue moved. Not enough, but something. He breathed out slowly. Outside, the wind pressed harder. Snow rattled against the windows. Daniel stood and shrugged out of his jacket, then wrapped it around the smallest body. Heat transfers best when it knows where to go. He sat with his back against the stove, legs bent, the puppies between his boots and chest, making himself part of the system. He watched the second puppy twitch and felt a tight release in his shoulders. He did not smile. He had learned not to count progress early. His mind moved anyway, uninvited. He remembered nights overseas when stopping was not an option. When you drove, because stopping meant worse. When you learned that the body obeys the decision long after fear arrives. He remembered a commander who had once told him, quiet and flat, that doing the right thing often costs you time you cannot spare. Daniel had believed him then. He believed him now. He looked again at the ropes coiled on the counter where he had dropped them. Clean knots, even spacing. Someone had planned this. That fact sat heavier than the cold. He picked up one rope and examined it. No fraying, no panic marks. Whoever tied these puppies had not rushed. That made it worse. He set the rope down and returned his focus where it belonged. The smallest puppy shuddered again, then stilled. Daniel leaned closer, ear near the chest. A thin heartbeat met him. He closed his eyes once. Not prayer. Focus. He adjusted the blanket, kept contact steady. Time stretched, elastic and thin. At some point, the second puppy lifted its head and let out a sound that was barely a whine. Daniel answered without thinking. Easy, he said. The word landed. The puppy settled. Daniel realized his hands were shaking. He forced them still. Outside, the storm thickened. He thought briefly of town, of phones, and help, then dismissed it. Roads would close, response would slow. This was his now. He accepted it without ceremony. After a long while, the weakest puppy drew a deeper breath. Then another. Color returned in faint shades. Daniel felt it then, not relief, but urgency sharpened. They were alive. That did not mean safe. He needed a vet. He needed warmth that did not flicker. He needed another option. His thoughts went unasked to a small bakery down the valley. Margaret Lewis. He had fixed her back steps last fall. She had pressed bread into his hands like payment mattered more when shared. Her ovens ran hot. Her place stayed open later than sense allowed. He weighed the idea and dismissed it, then waited again. 2 puppies could travel, 1 could not. The smallest stayed pressed to his chest, breathing shallow but present. Daniel decided he would split the risk. He would keep the weakest here and take the other 2 down the hill for steady heat. He stood carefully, testing balance, and moved with the puppies tucked in. He wrapped the smallest tighter and placed him near the stove with a barrier to block drafts. He left instructions for himself on the counter, written large, simple, in case fatigue made him stupid. Check breath, small sips, no rush. Then he bundled the other 2 and carried them back to the truck. As he drove, snow thickened into a white tunnel. He slowed, eyes scanning. He did not think about what could go wrong. He thought about what needed doing. When the bakery lights appeared, warm and low against the storm, Daniel felt something ease that he had not named. He parked and lifted the puppies again, knocking once before opening the door. Heat rolled out, heavy with bread and yeast. Margaret Lewis looked up from the counter, surprise cutting through her tired face. She took in the sight in a second and did not ask questions. She moved the sign to closed and cleared a space near the ovens. Put them here, she said. Daniel did. The puppies stirred. Margaret fetched towels and a shallow pan without instruction. She had lived long enough to recognize urgency. Daniel watched her work and felt a quiet alignment settle. This was still the same moment that had begun on the road. It was just widening. He checked his watch. Time mattered. He would return to the cabin soon. He looked at the puppies, then at Margaret. I'll be back, he said. She nodded once. Outside, the storm closed ranks. Inside, 3 small lives held on, and Daniel Brooks understood that he had crossed a line he would not step back over. Snow kept falling over the hills near Stanley, Idaho, steady and fine, the kind that buried sound and softened edges while making every decision heavier. The cabin sat alone against the slope, wood darkened by years of weather, smoke lifting straight from the chimney before the wind bent it away. Inside, heat gathered slowly, pushed by the stove that Daniel Brooks fed with split pine until the iron glowed dull red. He moved without hurry, but never stopped moving. He knew the danger of rushing warmth into bodies that had lost it too fast. He also knew the danger of waiting. He worked between those truths. The smallest puppy lay wrapped in Daniel's jacket near the stove, chest barely rising, breath thin but present. Daniel knelt close enough to feel it. He counted again. Still there. He turned his attention to the other 2. Back from the bakery now, bodies no longer rigid, but weak, their legs uncertain when they tried to shift. He dried their paws again, checking pads for cracks, rubbing gently until faint warmth returned. He offered water in a shallow lid, tipping it so only a drop touched their mouths at a time. One swallowed. The other turned away, then came back on its own. Daniel let that be a win. He did not speak praise. He focused on the next small task. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and wet wool. Outside, the storm pressed on the walls as if asking a question. Daniel felt the answer forming in him, steady and unwanted. He picked up the phone and called the local animal rescue. The line crackled. A woman answered, tired but professional. Her name was Lisa Carter, a mid-30s volunteer coordinator, voice calm in the way people learn when emergencies become routine. Daniel told her what he had. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she sighed once. Roads were closing. The pass had iced over an hour ago. They were already full. They could not send anyone tonight. She told him what to watch for. Pale gums, shallow breathing, sudden warmth followed by collapse. Daniel wrote it down even though he already knew. He thanked her and ended the call. The room felt quieter after, not empty, but focused. He sat back on his heels and looked at the 3 small bodies aligned near the stove. 2 stirred now and then. The smallest did not. Daniel felt the old ache in his shoulders that came when responsibility settled without asking. He thought of calling a vet directly, then dismissed it. The clinic would be closed. Even if it wasn't, the roads would win. He was it. He adjusted the stove damper, careful not to overheat the room. He rotated the puppies slightly, so heat reached evenly. He checked ears, gums, bellies. He kept notes on a pad he kept for repairs, converting it into a log because logs turn chaos into sequence. Outside, a gust rattled the window. Daniel stood and braced it, then returned to the floor. He did not pace. He stayed where he could see everything at once. He thought about Margaret Lewis down the valley, her ovens glowing, her hands steady. He had seen something in her tonight. The way she moved when the puppies came in. No questions, no hesitation. He had seen that before in Medics Under Fire. It calmed him. He focused again on the smallest puppy. He pressed 2 fingers gently against the chest and spoke quietly, not to soothe, but to keep himself anchored. He told the puppy where he was. He told him the fire was on. He told him to keep breathing. The words were plain. The meaning was not. Minutes passed, or longer. Time lost its shape. Daniel felt the puppy twitch once, then again. A shallow breath deepened. He leaned closer, watching for false signs. The puppy's mouth opened slightly. A faint sound escaped. Daniel held still. He had learned that too much reaction could break fragile gains. He waited. The sound came again, a thin, broken whine. Then something else happened. The puppy's eyelids fluttered. Not open. Not yet, but moving. Daniel felt his chest tighten and forced it loose. He did not allow relief. He allowed attention. He adjusted the blanket, kept contact steady. The puppy's eyes opened a fraction, dark, unfocused. Then they closed again. Daniel stayed exactly where he was. He did not move until the breathing steadied. Only then did he stand and stretch his back. He walked to the counter and poured water for himself, drank half, set the rest aside. He called Margaret. She answered on the second ring. Her voice sounded warmer now, less tired. He told her the smallest one was still alive. She said she had kept the ovens on. She said the 2 with her had slept, then woken, then slept again. She said one had tried to crawl toward the heat. Daniel pictured it and felt something soften. He told her he would come back in the morning if the roads allowed. She said she would be there. He hung up and returned to the floor. He fed the fire again. He cleaned a small cut he found on one puppy's paw, shallow, not infected. He wrapped it. He checked the ropes again, then put them out of sight. He did not want them in the room. He sat and watched the storm through the window, the white swallowing distance. He thought of the fence on the road, the empty space now. He thought of how easy it would have been to drive past. He did not let the thought linger. It was not useful. What mattered was now. The smallest puppy stirred again. This time the eyes opened fully. They did not focus, but they opened. Daniel leaned in, breath held. The puppy looked toward the heat, then toward the sound of Daniel's breathing. A tiny tongue moved. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He placed a finger against the puppy's chest, steady, grounding. Good, he said, because the word fit. The puppy closed its eyes again, but the breathing stayed deeper. Daniel sat back against the stove and let the heat seep into him. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, 3 lives held, fragile but present. Daniel understood that whatever came next, the choice he had made on the road had already changed the shape of his winter. Snow eased slightly over the valley near Stanley, Idaho, no longer falling hard, but drifting in light sheets that blurred distance and softened sound. The storm had not ended. It had only paused. Daniel Brooks stood in his cabin doorway and tested the air with his face before stepping out. Cold still held its ground. Inside, the stove burned steady. The smallest puppy slept near it, breathing deeper now, chest rising with more confidence than the night before. Daniel watched for a full minute before turning away. He did not rush departures. He had learned that leaving too soon could undo careful work. The other two puppies, stronger now, stirred when he moved. They were not steady on their legs, but they responded to his presence. He fed them small sips again, checked paws, ears, eyes. Then he made a choice he had already been circling since the call with rescue. He would split care again, but this time with intention. He wrapped the two healthier puppies in clean towels, secured them in a crate padded with blankets, and loaded them into the truck. He left the smallest one behind, the stove washed by a thermometer and notes taped to the wall in block letters. He drove slowly down the hill, eyes scanning the road, the truck heavy with responsibility rather than speed. The bakery came into view through the thinning snow, its windows glowing amber against the white. That light mattered more than Daniel wanted to admit. He parked close and carried the crate inside. Heat met him at once, thick and honest. Margaret Lewis looked up from the counter where she was kneading dough, sleeves rolled, flour dusting her hands. Her face had changed since the night before. Less tired, more alert. She did not ask how the smallest one was. She waited. Daniel set the crate near the ovens and opened it carefully. The puppies shifted and made small sounds. Not cries, just proof of life. Margaret knelt, slow and careful, and held her hands near them without touching. She watched their breathing. She nodded once. "They're stronger," she said. It was not praise. It was observation. Margaret moved chairs and set a low barrier to keep drafts away. She adjusted the oven schedule so heat stayed constant. She placed shallow bowls of warm water within reach. Daniel noticed every decision. She worked like someone who had learned to manage fragile things. Margaret lived alone now. Her husband Thomas had died the previous winter during a cold snap that had turned routine days dangerous. A heart condition, too much strain, too much cold. Since then, Margaret had kept the bakery open out of habit more than hope. The mornings were quiet, the afternoons empty. Today felt different. The kitchen held sound again. Small movements, soft breathing, a reason to stay present. Daniel stood by the counter and felt something loosen in his chest. He did not mistake it for relief. It was alignment. He explained what rescue had said. Overloaded, roads uncertain. He told her he would check back at midday. Margaret listened, hands resting on the counter. "They can stay," she said, "as long as they need." Daniel nodded. He did not thank her. He respected her. Outside, he returned to the cabin and spent the next hours in careful watch. He checked the smallest puppy often. The breathing stayed steady. The eyes opened longer now, tracking light. He cleaned a small area where frost had bitten skin. He kept notes. He fed the fire. At midday, his phone rang. Lisa Carter from rescue. Roads were clearing. They could take the puppies in the evening if transport allowed. Daniel thanked her and said he would call back. He drove down to the bakery again. Margaret was packaging loaves. The puppies slept between oven cycles, bodies warm, breaths even. Daniel told her about rescue. She did not answer right away. She watched the puppies wake and shift toward the heat. She set the bread aside and wiped her hands. "Not today," she said. Daniel waited. "They need quiet," she continued. "And they need someone here." "I'm here." Daniel nodded again. He felt no conflict. He felt certainty grow. He called rescue back and declined for now. He returned to the cabin and found the smallest puppy awake, eyes open and clear. He knelt and met that gaze. It held no fear now, only need. He stayed until the puppy slept again. Evening came without ceremony. Snow began again, fine and persistent. Daniel returned to the bakery one last time before night settled. Margaret had closed the front early. The sign read closed. Inside, the ovens glowed. She sat at a small table near the puppies, knitting paused in her lap, eyes on their rise and fall. Daniel told her the smallest one was improving. She smiled, brief and real. "Good," she said. "Then there's time." Daniel stepped outside and felt the cold reclaim him. He looked back once through the glass. Warmth held. He drove uphill with the sense that something had shifted, not loudly, but permanently. In the quiet kitchen below, Margaret Lewis watched over two small lives and understood, perhaps for the first time since her husband's death, that care could still ask something of her, and that she could still answer. When rescue called again later that night, she let the phone ring. She stayed where she was. Snow returned with weight and intent, falling thicker than before, packing the world into quiet layers that dulled sound and shortened sight. The ridge above Stanley disappeared into white, and the road between cabins vanished under drifts that shifted with every gust. Daniel Brooks sat awake in his chair near the stove, boots still on, jacket within reach. He had learned not to sleep deeply when responsibility breathed in the same room. The smallest puppy lay close to the fire, wrapped and still, chest rising with a slow, steady rhythm. Daniel counted without thinking. The cabin was quiet enough that each sound mattered. Wood settled, wind pressed. Then something cut through it. A sound too sharp to belong to weather. The puppy lifted his head and cried out, a thin, urgent howl that broke the silence cleanly. Daniel stood at once. The cry came again, louder, strained, not fear, but alarm. Daniel pulled on his jacket and stepped outside, the cold hitting hard, immediate, the kind that punished bare skin. The puppy's howl followed him, insistent, pulling him down slope toward the neighboring property. Daniel did not question it. He ran. Snow grabbed at his boots, slowing him, but he kept his balance, breath controlled, eyes scanning for shape and movement. He saw the porch light at Frank Miller's cabin flicker weakly through the storm. Frank was 78, a former miner who had spent decades underground and had never quite learned to live above it. He lived alone, kept to himself, spoke little when spoken to. Daniel had helped him once with a frozen pipe. That was the extent of their connection. Daniel reached the yard and saw him. Frank lay half-buried near the shed where the heater unit sat. One arm bent wrong beneath him, his body angled as if he had tried to stand and failed. Snow dusted his hair and shoulders. His eyes were open but unfocused. Daniel dropped to a knee beside him, blocking the wind with his body. He checked breathing. Shallow, present. He spoke Frank's name. No response. He checked pulse. Weak, but there. Frank's lips moved, a sound trapped in his throat. Daniel leaned close. Don't move, he said, firm and calm. He saw the tracks now. Frank had gone out to check the heater, likely worried about another freeze. He had slipped. Time had done the rest. Daniel pulled out his phone and called emergency services. Voice steady, precise. He gave location, condition, age. He ended the call and went to work. He brushed snow away from Frank's face, adjusted his position carefully, keeping the spine aligned. He covered him with his jacket, then another from his pack. He watched Frank's eyes flicker, then focus briefly. Help's coming, Daniel said. Frank's mouth moved again. Cold, he whispered. Daniel nodded. I know, he said. Stay with me. From up the slope, the puppy's howl came again, then stopped. Silence returned, heavy but changed. Daniel felt the weight of minutes pressing. He watched Frank's breathing falter, then catch. He spoke continuously now, not filler, but anchors. He told Frank what he was doing. He told him to keep breathing. He counted breaths aloud, low and even. Sirens cut through the storm at last, distant, then closer. Lights flashed through the snow. Paramedics arrived, faces set, movements efficient. They took over without waste. They loaded Frank onto a stretcher, wrapped him in heat packs, secured him inside the ambulance. One of them, a woman in her 40s with gray threaded through her hair, glanced at Daniel. Good timing, she said. Another 10 minutes, and we'd be having a different conversation. Daniel nodded once. He watched the doors close. The ambulance pulled away, lights swallowed by snow. Daniel stood alone in the yard for a moment, breath slowing. Then he heard it again, the puppy's cry, softer now, from the cabin above. Daniel turned and climbed back through the storm. Inside, he knelt by the fire. The puppy looked at him, eyes wide, alert, breathing fast. Daniel placed a hand on the small chest and felt the rapid beat. You did good, he said, because the words fit. He sat there until the puppy settled, until the breathing slowed. Only then did he allow the tension to drain from his shoulders. Later, he received the call from the hospital. Frank was stable. Hypothermia, a fall, no major internal bleeding. He would recover. The doctor's voice was factual, practiced. The words landed anyway. Daniel ended the call and sat back against the wall. He did not feel relief like celebration. He felt it like gravity easing. He looked at the puppy again and understood the line that had been crossed. The rescue on the road had already saved more than it showed. Outside, snow continued to fall, indifferent and thorough. Inside, life held. Daniel fed the fire once more and stayed awake until the storm thinned. Winter loosened its grip just enough to allow the valley near Stanley, Idaho to breathe, though cold still ruled the ground and snow stayed packed in the shadows. The sky cleared into a pale blue that felt temporary, like borrowed time. Daniel Brooks stood outside his cabin and watched the three puppies move in the thin sunlight. Their steps were still awkward, legs too big for their bodies, but the stiffness was gone. They chased each other in short bursts, then collapsed into the snow, panting, alive in ways that had not been certain days earlier. Daniel felt the shift inside himself and did not look away from it. He had learned that naming a change made it real. All three had survived, not by luck alone, but by attention, by choice. He knelt and examined them again, methodical as ever. Eyes clear, gums pink, breathing strong. The smallest, once silent by the stove, now stood steady and pushed his nose into Daniel's palm with insistence. Daniel closed his fingers around that warmth and made the decision he had been postponing. He would not separate them. He had seen what isolation did to bodies in the cold. He would not do that again if he could help it. He sat at the cabin table that evening with a notebook and wrote 3 names. Hope, Grace, Winter. He chose them carefully. Hope for the one that had held on when there was no reason to. Grace for the one that had accepted help without fear. Winter for the one born into it and shaped by it, not broken. He spoke the names aloud once. The puppies lifted their heads as if listening. Down the hill, Margaret Lewis unlocked her bakery door earlier than she had in years. She did it without ceremony. She turned on the lights and let the ovens warm while the town still slept. Word had spread, not fast, just enough. A woman came in for coffee and stayed to watch the puppies curl near the heat. Then a man stopped by on his way to work, then another. No one rushed. They spoke softly. They smiled. Margaret noticed that people lingered now, not to buy more, but to be present. She did not mind. Frank Miller returned home 2 days later with a cane and a bruised pride. He moved slow but steady. Neighbors brought soup. Someone fixed his shed door. He waved from his porch and said thank you more than he ever had. Daniel visited once, checked the heater, left quietly. He did not need thanks. He had what he needed. Over the next days, the town adjusted in small ways. People checked on each other. Someone shoveled a drive that was not theirs. Someone else replaced a porch light that had gone dark. Margaret kept opening early. She did not count the cost. Daniel watched the puppies grow stronger and felt the weight of responsibility settle into something like purpose. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridge, he loaded the puppies into the truck and drove down to the bakery. Margaret smiled when she saw them. They look different, she said. They are, Daniel replied. He told her the names. She nodded as if they fit. They sat at a small table while the puppies slept nearby. Daniel spoke plainly. He would keep them together. Margaret agreed without hesitation. Some things shouldn't be divided, she said. Daniel drove back up the hill under a sky full of stars and felt the truth of that statement follow him. At the cabin, he opened the door and let the puppies run in ahead of him. They knew the place now. They moved with confidence. Daniel banked the fire and sat down on the floor with his back against the wall. The puppies piled against him without instruction. He rested a hand on each and felt 3 heartbeats under his palm. Outside, winter remained. Inside, something had changed. Not loudly, but permanently. Cold still owned the nights in the valley near Stanley, Idaho. But the darkness no longer felt empty. Snow lay deep and clean, reflecting light from cabin windows that stayed on longer than before. Daniel Brooks stood at his kitchen counter and filled out the last form with careful block letters. Adoption paperwork, names printed clearly. Hope, Grace, Winter. He signed and dated the page, then set the pen down and rested both hands flat on the wood. He did not feel ceremony. He felt completion. The 3 puppies moved through the cabin behind him, nails clicking softly on the floor, bodies confident now, energy contained but growing. Daniel listened to the sound and understood that the quiet he had once built this place for had changed shape. He did not live alone anymore. He had not planned that. He accepted it. He installed a second light outside the cabin door that afternoon. He did not like stumbling in the dark, and the puppies needed visibility. He noticed that he left it on when he went inside. He noticed that he did not turn it off later. Light had become a habit. Down the hill, Margaret Lewis stood behind the counter of her bakery and watched people arrive before the ovens finished warming. She had posted a small sign in the window, written by hand. Coffee, bread, check-ins, welcome. She did not call it a program. She called it sense. A retired teacher stopped by to ask about the dogs and stayed to drink coffee. A man who lived alone at the edge of town came in because he had seen the light on early and thought it meant something. Margaret listened more than she spoke. She kept a notebook by the register and wrote names, addresses, notes, lives mapped lightly on paper. She had learned that winter punished those who were not seen. She decided to see them first. She called Daniel one evening and told him what she was doing. He listened. He did not advise. He offered help where it mattered. He installed porch lights for 2 houses that week. He showed a neighbor how to insulate a door with what they had. He drove food when snow closed the side road. He did not advertise any of it. He moved with the same discipline he had learned long ago, but without the edge. Frank Miller walked with a cane now and carried himself like a man who had been reminded of limits. He accepted help without argument. He brought a thermos to the bakery and sat near the door, watching the puppies play. He told one story about the mine and then stopped, as if words cost more than he wanted to spend. The town adjusted. Small groups formed. No meetings, no flyers, just checks and habits. Daniel finished the last inspection required for the adoption. The official handed him the papers and smiled. "They're lucky," she said. Daniel nodded. He did not correct her. He drove back to the cabin with the puppies in the back seat, heads pressed to the window, watching the world pass as if it belonged to them. At home, he banked the stove and cooked a simple meal. He ate at the table for once. The puppies settled nearby, close enough to touch. Daniel thought about the man he had been before the road, the one who valued silence because it did not ask questions. He realized silence could take things too. It could take people if you let it. He stood and turned off the main light, leaving the lamp on. He left the porch light burning. Outside, snow fell again, steady and patient. Inside, warmth held. Down the valley, Margaret locked up late and left the front light on. A woman across town noticed and did the same. One light became 2. 2 became many. The winter did not end, but the quiet did. Spring reached the valley near Stanley, Idaho, without announcement, arriving the way healing often does, quietly and without asking permission. Snow retreated from the roads in uneven lines, leaving behind dark earth and thin streams of meltwater that followed gravity downhill. The air no longer cut at the lungs. It softened instead, carrying the smell of damp wood and thawed ground. Daniel Brooks walked along the mountain road with 3 young dogs pacing ahead of him, their movements confident and sure, their bodies no longer fragile. Hope, grace, and winter had grown fast over the weeks. Their legs had lengthened, their chests broadened, their coats thick and clean. They moved with the easy coordination of animals that trusted the world again. Daniel slowed as the fence came into view. It was the same weathered wooden barrier where everything had begun, still leaning slightly, still rough to the touch. The snow around it had melted completely, revealing bare ground marked only by old impressions. No rope, no ice, no sign that 3 lives had once been left here to disappear. Daniel stopped and rested his hands on his hips, breathing evenly. He watched the dogs investigate the fence posts, sniffing with brief interest before turning back toward him. They did not linger. The place held no power anymore. Daniel felt the weight of that realization settle gently. Some places only matter once. When their purpose is fulfilled, they let go. He knelt and ran a hand along each dog's back, feeling muscle beneath fur, warmth beneath skin. This road no longer held a question. Down in town, Margaret Lewis stood in the doorway of her bakery, the door propped open, though the morning was already bright. The lamps inside were still on. She had turned them on out of habit before dawn and had not thought to turn them off. Light had become part of how the place breathed. The ovens hummed. The smell of bread carried down the street. People passed and waved. Some stopped in. Others simply smiled and continued on, reassured by the sight of an open door. Margaret leaned against the frame and watched. She felt no hurry. The bakery no longer felt like something she was trying to keep alive. It felt alive on its own. Across the street, Frank Miller moved carefully down his steps. A small box balanced in his hands. He had filled it with rolls Margaret had pressed on him without charge. Frank walked to his neighbor's porch and set the box down. He knocked and waited. When the door opened, he smiled once, brief and honest. He said few words. He did not need many. He turned and made his way home with steady steps, cane tapping softly against the concrete. The town had learned something over the winter. It was not complicated. When you see someone struggling, you stop. You do not pass by and tell yourself someone else will handle it. You handle it. That evening, Daniel returned to the cabin with the dogs racing ahead of him, their energy filling the space before he even opened the door. He set his boots aside and banked the fire, adding one more log for the night. He cooked a simple meal and ate at the table, listening to the quiet sounds of the dogs settling nearby. He noticed how the silence had changed. It no longer felt empty or demanding. It felt complete. Afterward, he sat back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment longer than he meant to. Outside, the porch light glowed against the deepening dusk, steady and warm. Daniel had not turned it off in weeks. He did not plan to start now. The dogs lay before the hearth, bodies touching, breaths slow and even. Daniel slept in the chair, head tilted slightly to one side, the fire reflecting softly on the walls. The light outside stayed on, not to fight the dark, but to say that someone was here. Winter had taken what it could from this place. It had not taken this. Sometimes a miracle does not arrive as thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes it comes quietly, through a choice made in the cold, through hands that stop instead of passing by, through a heart that listens when the world feels silent. If there is a mark of God in this story, it is not in the storm or the suffering, but in the compassion that moved ordinary people to act. In our daily lives, we may not face frozen roads or lives bound by rope, but we all encounter moments where someone needs to be seen, heard, or helped. Those moments are invitations. When we answer them, we become part of the miracle. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment below and subscribe to the channel so we can continue telling stories of faith, kindness, and second chances. May God bless you and your home, protect you through every season, and place light in your path whenever the road feels cold or uncertain.